Order. And Ms. Wilson, do we have confirmation of notice to the media?
Yes, ma'am, they were.
Okay. And currently we do have a quorum of the board present. And then we would need to have a motion to approve the agenda that we have in front of us.
Move to approve the agenda in front of us.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor of approving our agenda? Thank you. Now we can get moving with our workshop with Duff, Freeman, and Lyon.
Good afternoon, and it's great to see all you guys again. And thank you for having us here on this Monday afternoon to go over a few policy notes and things with you as the board, and hopefully give you some insight on becoming and being the best or better board member, or the best board member that you can be. My name is William Freeman. I'm a partner with the law firm of Duff, Freeman, Lyon. I know everyone here. I've got my senior partner, Mr. Dave Duff. He's a long-time attorney who's been working with this district for a while, as I just found out. And when he takes the stand, he'll give you guys a kind of his history with Law 55, and I believe you guys will find it quite interesting. But can you
Mr. Freeman,
yeah.
Mr. Freeman, up here. I'm sorry. Could you pull your mic up closer, or I'm finding it hard to hear you. I don't know if anyone else is.
Your deep voice and that mask don't get together.
Right.
I'm
I
sorry.
would say you can, to me, I'm fine with no mask.
Okay, yeah.
We're 6 feet apart.
There's a little button on the back of it. You should be able to extend it a little bit too.
Oh, okay. Hey, okay.
Thank you.
Lawrence, all right. How about now?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Like I said, I'm William Freeman, and we're here today to speak to you guys about your role as board members with the district, with Lawrence County School District 55. This is a brief outline of what we're going to talk about: the role, governance, powers and duties of the board, as well as powers and duties of board members individually, ethics, some expectations of the board, so forth and so on. And I'm just jump right in. What is the role of the school board? Initially, the role of the school board is to provide a vision for the district. Our vision should be focused on the most important commodity that we have, which is our students. The board also sets the structure to how this vision will be applied. Part of that structure includes hiring the best candidate to implement that structure, and that is the superintendent. We develop policies. The board writes our policies, and you develop both short and long-term goals for the district, which are in line with the vision. Okay, our short and our long-term goals that we develop, they need to be communicated to the superintendent, so the superintendent knows exactly what the board desires of him or her to do.
Can we ask questions while you go on?
Of course.
Okay, now what you were just saying about the board developing policies, that's really not how we do it, because of the state and federal implications of financing.
Okay, and
These things come down to us already.
yes. Now, we're going to get into that, but Dave and I we like more interactive presentations, and I should have told you guys that. So if you have a question, fire it at us, and one of us will get it, and we're pretty good at getting back on script. So he stood up, which means he wants to handle that. So you want to get that now?
I stood up so I could hear a little better.
Oh, well, it's part of your presentation, and what he was saying is they don't really develop their own policies. He's referring to a lot of policies that come down from the State Department to them. So I don't know if you want to address it now or wait.
Well, yeah, I'd be glad to touch on it now anyway. As you probably know, some policies are in effect mandated by state law. For example, when the state passed a statute prohibiting bullying in the schools, the statute itself said that every school district must now implement a policy about anti-bullying. So you'd have to have that policy in order to be in compliance with state law. And there are a lot of policies that actually are required by state law. And then there are a lot of policies that are just, good practice that aren't mandated by law, but which are good policies to have. And that's a whole slew of, operational type policies and things you do. So while the board certainly has a fair amount of discretion when it comes to policy development, which is one of your primary duties and responsibilities to review policy, to propose new policies, to amend certain policies. Some policies are required by law. There are quite a few of them. Another example might be you've got policies that implement the Freedom of Information Act and how you notice a meeting. Well, you don't really have to have a policy, but if you're going to properly follow FOIA, it's best to have that policy so that the law gets sort of, translated down into your policy. It's in your policy manual, etc. But as we go through this, we can address that further. But that's a start. Okay.
Got it? All right. With structure, okay. Accountability. Not only do you develop the short and long-term goals, like I said, and communicate those to the superintendent, after you've developed those goals, what we have to do as a board is make sure that we're monitoring the progress of the district towards our goals. Okay, so it's not just good enough to say, hey, this is what we want to do. Here, superintendent, you take it and run with it. We as board members, we have to look into that and make sure that the district is progressing, making meaningful progress towards those goals. And how do we do that? By evaluating the superintendent. Okay, as we all know, we evaluate our superintendent every year. Not only do we evaluate the superintendent, but as a board, we should also evaluate ourselves. Okay, are we setting policies that are going to help us as a board advance the visions that we set for ourselves? Or did we set our vision, but then we set our policies which will have us addressing something that's totally different than our vision? So board members, we have to hold not only the superintendent and the district accountable, but ourselves as well as board members. And again, the board, we always need to remember that we are the liaison between the community and the district, or through the superintendent. Okay, so as our community members come to us and they express their concerns, we're the ones who bring that back in a meaningful way to the board, to the superintendent, for the district to address those concerns. In our advocacy, we always want to make sure that we are being a good model, a good role model for our community who are looking at us as board members. We're setting a good example for them and showing that we have our continued importance on public school education. So we always want to be champions of our school district and as well as our superintendent. That's not saying that we have to always agree on everything, okay? You don't. But we always want to make sure that we are advancing the vision of the district which is again focused on our students, all students, not just students from our local areas, but all students. I believe you're up now. Wait, are you? Yeah, you're up on the law.
Okay, we're sort of doing a tag team here, so we're going to jockey back and forth a little bit.
Don't forget to give them your history, Dave.
Do what?
The history.
Yeah, I'm going to.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to meet with the board this afternoon. It's been quite a while since I have attended a meeting up here in Lawrence. I know that William has been quite involved in various matters, and although you haven't seen my face, I've been involved with William in discussing and coming to recommendations about the various matters that have occurred up here. I know there was a special ed case a while back, and as you know, recently there was a fairly major personnel case that got resolved. And throughout all of that, William and I were conferring. You may or may not know that our firm, Duff Freeman Lyon, our practice is almost exclusively in South Carolina public school districts. We do a little bit of other work, primarily in the public sector. For example, just recently, I've been representing the city of Lancaster, and I've gone to a couple of their council meetings in the last couple of weeks. They had a pretty significant personnel matter going on. But our 6 attorneys, practice school law and school administration every day, every week. I think you should know there are a lot of sub-areas to school law. There's personnel or HR that involves your teachers as well as your non-certified staff. There are lots of student matters, whether it's special education or student discipline. There's school finance, there's school construction, there's FOIA, there's the Ethics Act. There's a lot of sub-areas. So school districts are, quite regulated by law, particularly state law, but also federal law to some degree as well. And the slide that we now have up there on governing law. Afternoon, Susan.
Hey,
how are you?
I'm well. How about yourself?
Doing okay, I hope. I go back, although I haven't been up here recently, I go pretty far back with this district. I was looking at the portraits of your prior superintendents, and I actually remember working with Duke Hucks. I don't know whether any of you even know Duke Huck. Susan would, and maybe Anthony would. And everyone since Duke Huck's, Ed Taylor and I forget someone else in there, I've had some dealings or affiliation with, even if it was occasional. As a matter of fact, many years ago, I represented your district and Lawrence 56 in a lawsuit that was brought against the county auditor, whose name was Ms. Cox. Is Ms. Cox still around?
I don't think so.
It's been quite a few.
I think Peter Boxell was our financial person today. And that lawsuit had to do with something called required minimum effort. And there was a Ms. Cox and the 2 school districts disagreed on exactly how you calculate required minimum effort, which is something you've got to do annually. You have to at least expend the same amount of money. This is all under the Education Improvement Act, as you did the prior year. So we had that lawsuit that went up to the Supreme Court, again, many years ago. I also was involved. Do you still have the equalization tax formula where, as I recall, it's been a while, when new industry settles in Lawrence County, whether it's in your district or District 56, the revenues generated were shared with the other district where the plant chose not to locate, so that both districts would get the benefit from the new, new industry. And I was involved in, I think that was legislation, and I had a hand in, getting that passed, and which I recall, we called it the equalization tax, or something like that. So anyway, I have been involved for a long time. I just haven't been up here very, very frequently. But getting back to governing law, and I wish I had brought my Title 59. Does anybody have that blue tome? Probably sitting in personnel office, or maybe the superintendent's office. It's the South Carolina Code of Laws, and it's Title 59, which we commonly refer to as the school code. I mean, if you go to the library and you look for the South Carolina Code, you'll see Title 59. It's its own volume. So most of the laws that govern school districts and school boards, you can find in Title 59. There's actually a statute that requires new board members to be oriented. And I know some of you are relatively new, and I don't know whether you've had a chance to attend usually the school boards puts it on. Who did? You've nailed, okay, so you've gotten probably a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about. You'll be hearing it twice. And, there's a whole set of laws, but one of the most important parts of Title 59 is Section 59-19-90. And that's the general powers and duties of the school board. And it covers a lot of different things. It says you are to provide school buildings, school houses. It says that you are to hire and fire teachers. Now that's one of those that gets into that little, what's the board's role when it comes to hiring and firing? What's the administration's role? And generally speaking, and I think you all know this, and yet when people like to use this phrase, you hire the superintendent hires everybody else, which in a way is true. That's about 90% accurate, because the statute says that actually only the board can hire and ultimately fire. And of course, right about this time of the year, you've probably been presented with that list of teachers that are being renewed, and maybe you've had a couple that are being recommended not to be renewed. I don't know whether that's occurred this year or not. So really, the recommendation comes up sort of through personnel, the principals, of the superintendent, and then you all get presented that list. And it has to be by, they've changed the statute, I think by April 30th. If you don't notify those teachers by April 30, they get automatically renewed. So if there is a teacher who who the administration is recommending not be renewed, then that teacher needs to be on a list and voted on by the board before May 1. In other words, by April 30. Have you done that yet? You probably recently did that. Okay, so
where does the fairness come in with the school board to say somebody needs to be fired? I mean, we don't do any evaluations or anything. I mean,
no, and this is one of those situations where the board and the administration are working together They need to be working together because it is the administration, the principals, HR director, superintendent, assistant superintendent for instruction, whatever. They're the ones actually doing the evaluating and determining whether a teacher is performing satisfactorily. Now, as board members, you probably hear from the community or a neighbor, from a parent. You might say, you know, my child had Mrs. Smith, and from what I'm hearing, she's not a good teacher. Okay? So you're hearing that, okay? Am I getting out of my lane here? You're hearing that, but the board actually can't reach down and focus on a teacher and initiate a non-renewal, okay? That's got to come up from the administration to the board. And so long as you feel like the administration has properly evaluated if there's a need for a performance improvement plan, you know, by law we have to evaluate teachers at least every 3 years, even continuing contract teachers. You're all familiar with the various contract levels, right? Well, should I get into this so far? I mean, I'd like to, you know, answer your questions despite our script here. Let me tie it in this way. Look at the last bullet point. You're an appellate body for student discipline and employee grievances. And I'll tell you right now that the statutes on employee hearings of teachers is in 59-25-10 and some that follow, okay? The student discipline statute is 59-63-210, I think. I may be off a number or two. But you do sit as an appellate body. One of your functions, and we touch on this at some point here, you are quasi-judicial as well as being a legislative body. Legislative typically means you create policy, you adopt a budget. That's a legislative function. But in certain situations, you are also a judicial body. You are a judge and jury in student expulsion appeals that get to you. Not everyone gets to you, but you probably have at least a few a year that do. And then if you had a teacher non-renewal of a continuing contract teacher, a continuing contract teacher is one who has probably been with you at least 3 years, and they've progressed from induction to an annual contract to a continuing contract. And once a teacher gets to the continuing contract level, another way of saying it is they're tenured. They're protected very specifically by the Teacher Employment and Dismissal Act, and they can only be non-renewed or terminated mid-year for cause. But again, you're not supposed to be reaching down and grabbing those situations. They have to come up to you. Now, if you hear from several parents that Mrs. Smith is not doing a good job, you know, my child was in her class and he didn't learn anything. I'm kind of exaggerating here. But you certainly would say to the superintendent, you know, I hope that Mrs. Smith is being evaluated, and I hope that, you know, the principal in particular, maybe the assistant superintendent for instruction, I hope that you are aware that there are some questions about Mrs. Smith that need to be looked at. And then if it comes up to you on a non-renewal recommendation, you might sit as the judge and jury and determine whether the performance is unsatisfactory or in some cases, there's been some act of misconduct. Unfortunately, we still have, situations where teachers do something mid-year that results in an immediate recommendation for dismissal midterm, as opposed to a non-renewal. Non-renewals are generally failure to perform. Mid-year terminations tend to be more acts of misconduct, whether it's coming to work inebriated or failing to come to work, continuously, or, various things that can happen. And unfortunately, we still have too many sexual misconduct situations that occur in the schools, adult, teacher, student. So anyway, I'm way off the track here. I'm just going to give it back to William.
No, you got one more. I think you had one more.
I've got another.
Oh, no, you touched on that.
If you look at the next, I think I've touched on this one. Again, this is, you have a policy, BBA, that tracks very closely to what I said was in 59-19-90. Yeah, we did touch on this pretty good. You've got legislative policy-making responsibilities, you have some executive responsibilities, but you tend to delegate them to the administration, which is, in the sort of the corporate scheme of things, the superintendent is the CEO of a school district, is the chief executive officer. So a lot of executive functioning gets delegated by the board to the superintendent. Quasi-judicial, we've talked about that. Appraisal approval, we've sort of talked about that. Planning, monitoring, provision of financial resources. Again, superintendent and your finance director or your CFO develop a budget and present it to you. I'm sure you have many a workshop on the budget. And you have a public hearing on the budget. And ultimately, only the board can adopt the budget. The superintendent and CFO can prepare it, but only the board can adopt it. Public relations, that's sort of self-explanatory. You all have to be visible in the community. You've got to hopefully communicate what's happening that's good in your district, awards you might get, things that have turned out really well. Occasionally you have to inform your community of, honestly, of things that need to be addressed. So you have this public relations role as well. Okay.
All right.
Back to William.
Thanks. Let's talk about some ethics for the school board, and these are going to be found in board policy BCA and BCB. As school board members, as you guys know, you guys are publicly elected. Being that you're publicly elected, you have to adhere to very strict ethical guidelines. I don't know if you guys, well, maybe Ms. Ware, maybe Mr. Carpenter, I represented you guys on an ethical issue, ethics challenge, I guess, a few years ago. It was actually the superintendent. But you guys as board members are tasked with complying with those same strict ethical standards as, any other elected official would be. In dealing with that ethics, we also represent the entire district, the entire community. You don't just represent one or two individuals or any special interest group that may have, given you enough campaign money to, get your signs or your posters or whatever. You now own the board. You are part of this body. You represent everyone equally. Again, as Dave has touched on quite extensively, you as board members, you ethically develop those governing policies for the district. I think that's pretty self-explanatory and it's been explained. One thing you have to do as board member in fulfilling your ethical duty is be an active participant on the board. I mean, it's not good enough to just be elected, and I'm not referring to anyone that's not here. This is part of our presentation. I thought everyone was going to be here. But, you know, you need to be present. Not only do you need to be present, but you need to be an active participant, okay? You need to engage in the meaningful discussion as to the development of policy. That you're ethically charged with doing that. In part of that ethics, if you're going to engage in the policy making, you need to inform yourself of the issues and the decisions to when you're going to be making a decision that's going to affect the policy, which is going to affect the direction of the district and would push the district's decision forward. You are elected by citizens for that purpose, okay? They see something in you, in the community that says, hey, this individual has the right mindset to make decisions that's going to affect my child in their education. And that's what you need to do day in and day out as a board member. As Dave said, be visible in the community. You're elected by your community to represent the community, so you should be in the community as a board member, speaking to your constituents, you know, figuring out, like Dave said, what issues they have. Now, don't construe the two to say, okay, I'm talking to this person, I'm just going to put these issues forward. You know, no, you bring back everyone's issue, whether they're elected. Are you guys locally elected, or is it everyone elected generally?
Separate seats.
Okay, so y'all have separate seats. Yeah, so obviously you want to advocate for your people, but in your decision making, you don't want to set a district policy that's only going to benefit your constituents, okay? Or you don't want to set a policy for the specific purpose of hurting another constituent. And I know that doesn't happen here in Lawrence 55, and I'll leave that there. As I said, attend meetings, be active. Dave said communicate public concern with the superintendent. You know, let her know what's going on, what you're hearing. You know, what we don't do is say, this is what I'm hearing, and this is what you have to do about it. Okay, that's not where we are. But ethically, you're elected to represent your constituents, so make sure you bring that to the board. And again, going with something else Dave said, we want to be advocates as well, ethically. We want to put the district in the best light. We always want to instill public confidence in the school district and our administration. By doing so, guess what? We also instill public confidence in us as a board. You know, I've dealt with a lot of boards, and there's a little, you know, you may have some bickering back and forth as board members. You guys don't always agree. Well, eventually, if we keep doing this, our constituents are not going to look at us and say, oh yeah, I like this guy, I like that guy, this guy's really fighting for us, that guy really fighting for him. No, they're going to say, you know what, the school board is jacked up. Okay, that's what we don't want, because when they're looking at the school board as being jacked up or messed up, now they're going to look at the district as being jacked up and messed up. And that's where we lose that public confidence. Those are the tax-paying people who keep this district going. So you always want to put the district in the best light in the community. And by doing so, we will create an environment that is conducive to our kids striving to be the best they can be educationally. You know, Dave was talking about, you know, the problems come from the bottom up. Well, the good comes from the top down to our students. If the board is proud of our district, is proud of our superintendent, is proud of our administrators and our teachers, guess what? That's going to flow down and everyone is going to be proud. But if constantly all we ever hear from us as members is, you know, oh my God, this is bad, that is bad, that's going to trickle down and we're not going to be the best district that we can be. Again, this is going back to what I was just saying. Support the employment of the person who's best qualified for that position. That's your superintendent. I mean, you hired your superintendent for a reason. Believe in that superintendent. Support that superintendent in doing their job. Help them do their job consistent with our role as board members. Conflict of interest. This is big, and this is touchy, and this is very easy for us as board members to unintentionally get into, and this is probably the most common ethical violation that board members will run into, because a lot of board members get elected to the board because of our prior involvement in the community. You know, whether we're a business owner or there's something that we do, that we provide some good for the community. Well, then you get on the board and you want to provide that same benefit to the district. Well, now you understand how that can be a conflict of interest. So that's something that we always have to consider. Support legislation and funding. That goes back to something I said earlier. You want to support legislation and funding that helps the district as a whole. Don't just support the legislation or the funding that's going to help just your individual constituents. You want to make sure that we're doing everything to create the best district possible. And then, like I said, make sure that the educational setting that we set up is the best for all of our students as a whole. This next for me, yes. What are our expectations from the board? And this is the board as a whole. Okay, what are our expectations from the board? The most important thing that we're expected to do as publicly elected school board members is to support public education. Across the state of South Carolina as a whole, maybe this is a little bit of my personal opinion, maybe this is a little bit of fact, there's been a trend to try to create other means of education for our students, which is characterized as public, but after you get down into it, it may not be public free as it should be. So we as board members, we need to make sure that we're advocating for public education, okay? That's going to be, you're advocating for Lawrence County School District 55, all right? That's what we're elected to do. The needs of our children need to be the forefront of the board's decision, and it needs to be put before our board's combined public agenda, okay? Make sure we're doing that. We always need to do what's best for all of our children. We've touched on this already, but we talked about communicating a clear vision. Again, that vision needs to, like I said, be consistent, needs to be communicated to the superintendent for the superintendent to carry out, and also needs to push forward public education. I'm gonna skip around here a little bit. Monitor student achievement. That goes back to what I was saying earlier. As a board, you need to celebrate the achievements of your students. You know, I don't know, maybe when we get back to, full-on public meetings, you can have a section, and y'all probably already do this, a session in your board where you recognize the achievements of your students, whether it be, the band or the chorus or a student who got published in a national magazine or something like that. You're going to make sure you're celebrating that. And you need to monitor the district's progress towards those goals. I know we've touched on this, but again, that goes back to evaluating superintendent as well as evaluating the board. Conducting professional meetings. Kind of goes without saying, but we want to put our best foot forward in front of the public, okay? If we're going to disagree, vehemently disagree, let's save that for executive session. When we come out in executive session, we want to present a unified front, okay? I mean, you can't always agree on everything, but if we're going to disagree, let's disagree in a respectable manner. All right? I think that's about all I have on that one. See, is this mine or this one's yours? I think this is you, Dave. Members individually?
Yeah, okay. You want me to pick up?
Sure. Jump right in.
All right, just to elaborate a little bit on a couple of things that, points that William made. This conflict of interest is an area that's covered not only in your board policy, but also under the South Carolina Ethics Act. And of course, if you have a personal interest or stake in something coming before the board, a contract or procurement decision, and you potentially could benefit personally from the board action, you're supposed to recuse yourself from consideration of that matter. And recusal should occur in writing, and the recusal should be submitted. There's a form actually for it. You can get it from the Ethics Commission. I think it's probably even on their website. And you should submit that recusal form at the beginning of the meeting. And then avoid, and if some contractual matters are initially discussed in executive session, because that's a permissible reason to be in executive session, is to discuss proposed contractual relations. And if you're recusing yourself from the vote in the public session that will follow the executive session, you should not participate even in the discussion in executive session. If you recuse, you totally recuse from the discussion as well as the vote. And that, yes, sir.
We've had several that recused themselves for contract approval. Should they also, we didn't discuss a whole lot on those lists, but should there
Contract approval of teachers?
with teachers, yes.
Now, there's a very important exception, which is called the large class exception.
Mm-hmm.
And this happens all the time, if as a school board member, your spouse is a teacher in the district and is on the list with 300 other teachers to be renewed or to get an increase in compensation, as long as your family member is part of a large group, you do not have to recuse yourself. Okay, that's clearly recognized under the Ethics Act. As long as your family member is one of many who are getting a uniform increase in compensation or a uniform vote to be renewed for the subsequent year, you're fine.
We've had list A and B and even list C at sometimes. So that one
Well,
member or another.
I don't think again, you don't need to be doing that if it's a large class. That's something that's, because your spouse might like to know that you voted in favor of her being renewed. So you don't have to recuse yourself from that if it's a large class.
And Dave, in my research and preparing for this, and you chime in on this, is kind of a question and a statement. I saw where it was stated that if, as far as nepotism, but if your family member or spouse's job predated your role on the board, then your participation does not automatically create an ethical violation.
Yeah, there's a narrow exception for that. I can't recall it word for word, but generally speaking, the large class exception to recusal is the way to go. Just remember that. Okay, we're moving on to, a lot of this is just so Where are we up to, William?
Oh, man.
Okay, yeah, this is one of those he gave to me, but it's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, these are the expectations of each of you individually. You know, demonstrate courage, okay, well, that's obvious. Work as a team, you know, when you should try to be a team player. Make sound decisions, that's self-explanatory. Stay informed, you all know that. Devote sufficient time to your duties. Now that, you know, that's kind of worth talking about, devote sufficient time to your duties. You really need to come to a board meeting prepared. I don't know whether you send out board packets a week before or the Friday before the meeting, whenever it might be. You know, sometimes there's a lot of material in there that's going to come up at the following meeting. And it's really your duty to spend some time reading through that material and being familiar, making some notes, you know, noting some questions you might have. So that's, you know, it's not just to show up at the night of the meeting and you know, hope for the best. You really need to work at it a little bit. It's an important job. I don't think I have really much more to talk about on that one, William.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the role of the superintendent. This is going to be in policy CBC. The superintendent, as you can see, is the administrator that develops and administer the development and maintenance of a positive educational program designed to meet the needs of the community. The superintendent is the one who will assist the board in recommending changes to board policy which the superintendent deems will be beneficial to the district. And this is going back to something we talked about earlier, where you want to work, you know, together as a team to make the district the best that it can be. The superintendent is also the one who will determine how the board's policy that is set is going to be implemented throughout the district. Okay, as we talked about earlier, the superintendent's role is to determine, you know, what type of positions or how many, you know, teachers or administrators or whatever the personnel is needed for the district. You know, as we said, superintendents will bring you guys up a recommendation, and you know, hopefully you guys will approve those recommendations and vote to create those positions or appoint those persons to the positions as recommended by the superintendent. The superintendent also is tasked with preparing the annual budget for the board to approve. That is a very important role of the superintendent, and that's why you hire a superintendent who's familiar with the requirements of the district to know what type of finances the district has, where those finances need to be expended, and it's our role as board members to make sure that's being dispersed equally across the entire district. We continue on. Like I said, the superintendent approves all expenditures that we are adopted. The superintendent also prepares the calendar for the district. Okay, let me skip around here a little bit. The superintendent is going to be the person who's going to represent, who's going to be a representative of your district in public. Okay, that's their role. So you definitely want to make sure you have a superintendent who presents well. And I will tell you that you guys have done a good job in hiring superintendents who do represent the district well at public appearances. And the superintendent also issues such administrative bulletins, circulars, manuals, booklets of the instruction he or she may deem necessary for the effective administration of the school, consistent with the board policy. So basically, the superintendent's role is to take the policy that the board establishes and put that policy into action to further the board's vision for the district. Okay? That's how we all work as a team. You guys say, hey, this is what I want. You hand it to the superintendent. The superintendent determines the best way to give you guys what it is that you want, that you feel is going to be best for the district. And what we do is we come back and we monitor and we make sure that we are always progressing towards our vision and that the superintendent is living up to our expectations and the district is living up to our expectations as well.
So if the superintendent come to us with this, and the majority of the board just don't agree with the superintendent, I mean, how is that tied to ethics? I mean, because they're gonna shoot it down. I mean, it's
Well,
normal all the time.
I think Mr. Carpenter, you combining two different theories there, because on one hand, the board is going to set the policy for how we want the district to operate, okay? And the superintendent is going to determine how we do that, how the district does that. So the board really doesn't, and I'll get into this when we talk about micromanagement, the board really doesn't dictate how the superintendent does her job. Okay, so if a majority of the board doesn't agree with the way that the superintendent is getting the board's vision accomplished, it's not really a function of the board to control how the superintendent does that. What we're more concerned about as board members is, okay, I may not agree with how we're getting there, but if we're getting to the destination that we want, you know, as a board member, my concern is more of, are we meeting the vision that we set for the district? Is that being accomplished more so than, okay, I wanted us to go left and we decided to go right, but we still ended up there. So I don't like the fact that we ended up there because we didn't get there the way I wanted to go. That's not really a function of the board, and that's what we kind of keep those two separate a little bit. If that's sort of answering your question.
And you took that hot potato.
It should be, but you dealing with human nature.
It should be, and I specifically left this one for Dave, and you asked the question, so I'm gonna try to answer it. But Dave, your mic's in your hand, so you address this a little.
I'm not sure I heard the question. What happens when the board and the superintendent disagree? Is that it?
On the direction of how it's accomplished.
On the direction of for the district?
Well, no, not on the direction of the district, but how the superintendent goes about getting to the goal that the board set for the
Okay.
district, if I understand you correctly.
Well, you know, this is where, that's a difficult question. Next, who's got the next question?
Well, I'll take this one right here.
I think he was joking.
Very good, I mean, we all went through it, right? And so throughout the whole United States, there's always this argument of, do we go back face-to-face, or are we going to be virtual, or where it is, right? So that's a hot topic we've all dealt with. And so this is one, I think, where maybe Anthony's alluding to is the superintendent reacts and manages and makes the call day to day. I think that's great. You need that agility within the system. But if we as a board say, no, we're stuck in this virtual week after week after week, should then the board, instead of just saying, you need to, Dr. Thomas, you need to put us back face to face, or should we say, no, we don't agree with this policy, so we should set some bounds around this and put the bumper guards up and say, this is the realm where you're allowed to make those snap decisions. But if we go outside this, we need to have a board policy that this set up ahead of time, not micromanaging, but set up ahead of time and say, this is the way. I think that's what you were alluding to, maybe not. But that's one that pops to my mind when I think about this issue.
Well, I think probably, and maybe we'll get into this in a minute, because this gets into which may be our next topic.
board superintendent relationship,
We can take it out next topic,
which is coming up here.
right there.
And couple things here. It's interesting, I went online and looked at your policy manual when I was getting ready to come up here. And when you get to board superintendent relationship, which is policy BDD, and by the way, I mean, I don't know whether all of you get a copy, an entire copy of your board manual, or whether I would, it's online. I always,
We used to have the big manuals, we would bring them to the meetings.
right,
The huge
oh yeah,
ones.
and nobody ever looks at those big
Right.
manuals.
Exactly.
You gotta, they're too heavy. But if, there are a couple of slides here that I think will indicate that you actually already have a mechanism for dealing with some basic, is this it? Let me, William, jump ahead a little bit, because I want to get into this slide. It talks about, keep going. Look at this slide a minute. There are possible decisions. Some decisions the administration makes, they're routine, and doesn't necessarily even tell the board about unless it blows up in some way. Some decisions the administration should make, but inform the board about it after the decision's made. Again, this sort of the day-to-day routine stuff that you can just be told about at the next meeting, or maybe in an email to you. Some decisions administration makes, but will want to hear how the board feels. And this actually, an example of this could be getting back to a teacher renewal or non-renewal, where let's say, for example, the superintendent is considering recommending not renewing, or not renewing a teacher, or transferring an administrator to a different position. And particularly when it comes to transfer, the superintendent actually has the authority to transfer, at least within the same level. But really wants to know how the board feels about that move. So before the superintendent actually makes the move, superintendent in executive session, because this might be personnel, suppose the superintendent said, look, I feel like the assistant principal here in school A is really not doing as well as he or she might, but I think they would do better as an AP at a different school. And I'm thinking of transferring that assistant superintendent. And I have the right to do that under board policy, but I'd kind of like to know how you all feel about that. So that's one where it kind of falls into that superintendent can make the decision, but would like to know how the board feels. The board is required by law to make a final decision on this. However, in nearly all cases, the board should respect the judgment of the administration. Now that would be like the teacher who the superintendent is going to recommend for renewal. They're not, maybe renewal with an improvement plan. And so board members say, really, can't we end this relationship right now and not have a repeat of last year? And the board technically has the right to hire and fire, but really at that point, at least for one more year, should defer to the administration's judgment on that. Board makes a decision, accepts responsibility for it. Board will usually expect information or recommendation. You know, that can be a lot of things. That can even be the budget. But Bill, can you pull up that one policy which there was no way that I could get this onto a PowerPoint, but I think we have, this is policy BDD, which is really one that you should look at when it comes to board-superintendent relationship. I don't know whether, can it be enlarged, Bill? It sort of tell you what, I even have, I actually have copies of this. William, would you mind giving everybody one of these? Because this is a real important thing, the working together, hopefully, of the board and the superintendent. Like on the point that you mentioned, Todd, superintendent might feel like we should stay virtual. The board may feel like, well, it's time to get back to in-person instruction. And there could be, and maybe a majority of the board feels that way. The superintendent, maybe the head of instruction, they feel like that's not what we want to be doing right now. We're going to be working toward that. So you have this tension, and you've really got to deal with it in some way and try to resolve it. But this I think you all should study BDD when you get a moment, because it really kind of breaks it down. Some of it is very obvious, but it goes, here's what the board does, here's what the superintendent does. Do you want the superintendent too?
Yeah.
Okay. It helps you keep in mind the respective roles of board and superintendent. I really like this, and this is your policy. I mean, you're guided by this. There's always some leeway and latitude in exactly how you interpret this breakdown of role and function, but as a general statement, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Now, getting back to some of these tough questions, and I'm a little leery of getting too far into this, but you evaluate the superintendent. I don't know what is in Dr. Thomas's contract, but it's probably like most contracts in this state, which, by the way, is a form of contract that was developed jointly many years ago by NSBA and AASA, which is the American Association of School Administrators. They're the two big groups, one for school boards, NSBA, the other AASA is the administrators' professional organization. So many years ago, the two groups got together and developed kind of a standard form of contract, which is pretty well followed and adopted in most states and also in this state. And it typically calls for an annual evaluation of the superintendent, and which is a very important, it can be a very sort of a complicated and delicate process, and you need to work at that. Often the contract provides that the superintendent will propose a format to the board. The board will look at the format. It can even be the instrument itself. And they have a discussion and try to agree on an instrument or a format to do the annual evaluation. And that can occur at different times in the year. Often it's good to do it once year-end results are in. I don't know what it's called for in your contract or policy, but it's a very important thing to do. And ultimately, if a board believes, a majority of the board, after a period of time, believes that the superintendent and the board don't agree on the direction of the district, that can come up in the evaluation. And of course, it can come up in the renewal of the contract as well. And that all gets surfaced through the evaluation process. The evaluation should be in light of goals that have been agreed upon. part of the evaluation is, if we set some goals for the district, where are we in achieving those? And often the superintendent during the evaluation process will prepare a statement of how much success have we had in achieving those agreed upon goals. So it's real important that the evaluation process, occur in good faith based on objective data that is some of which is provided by the superintendent. Some of it is given to you by the state. The report card, that sort of thing, and the graduation rate. I mean, it's there in hard and fast data, and that's part of the evaluation process. But I think this is a good policy to look at, BDD, and it sort of goes hand in hand with Bill. I think, does anyone have a question on this before we jump back to the PowerPoint? The other one that goes with it, Bill, if you would clear this, is Policy CA, which is the next section. Policy CA is entitled Administrative Goals and Priority Objectives, and it says, just the highlights, the board is devoted to and legally charged with the responsibility for providing an instructional program for the children within the community it serves. The board will rely on its chief executive officer, the superintendent of schools, to provide professional administrative leadership. The administration of the school system is responsible within the guidelines established by board policy for the direction and coordination of students and staff in their efforts to reach educational goals adopted by the board. The function of administration is to plan for, control, coordinate, supervise, and direct the district in accordance with the purposes, policies, plans, procedures, and programs authorized by the board. The board expects the administration to specialize in the following: the process of decision-making and communication, the planning, organization, implementation, and evaluation of educational programs and services, the coordination of various centers of influence, the demonstration of leadership, the development and maintenance of close working relationships and channels of communication, the prevention of misunderstandings and development of cooperation. Okay? So I would occasionally look at BDD and CA. They kind of go together to really understand the respective roles and duties. Any questions on what we've done so far?
Comment.
Okay.
Now, we talk, a lot of this is talking about transparency.
Right.
And I think sometimes we as a board, we take it too far. You just said that the duty that the superintendent had, trying to be transparent, doesn't mean that you have to share everything with the board at that moment. I mean, if kids get to fighting, that's one issue. It's a bigger issue if you had to take somebody to the hospital, because
Right.
kids fight all the time. But I think we, as this board, that's exactly what we expect from the superintendent, that she tells us every line item of everything that's done. And I don't think that's fair to the superintendent.
But I would say that it's better to err on the side of getting information to the board, even on some situations that don't seem all that big a deal. It's just, board members just hate to be surprised. They hate to hear about something from a neighbor that they wish they had heard from the superintendent. So while I do agree with you that every little, 3-day suspension at the middle school, the board doesn't have to be told of that.
And I think, let me piggyback off of that. I understand what you're saying, and I agree to a degree. There's some level of notification of potential incidents or potential issues that the superintendent needs to make the board aware of. And in responding to your statement, now it's going to be incumbent upon us as board members that we don't push too far to where we go beyond our just getting notified of something transpiring or taking place to where now we're involved in the administration or the discipline of that issue. So I think maybe that's where you're going, because if the board isn't made aware of it, that could potentially be an issue. But when you're made aware, when you go too far, when we're too aware of the situation, we can jeopardize ourselves, as you guys know, in our judicial function. Okay, yeah, well, I didn't want
Just
to.
sort of happen.
Yes, sir.
But I'm
That-
saying, you push and push and push, that's the potential you get from a superintendent.
Agreed, and what I'm saying is it's a delicate balance. It's not just a line in the sand where it's like, I'm not going to tell you anything or I'm going to tell you everything. It's a delicate balance. Of course, you as a board member, you want to know, hey, there's a potential situation that's arising at school A, which may subject the district to some sort of liability. Okay, when the superintendent provides you with that information, it's probably going to be an executive session. We all know that what happens in executive session stays in executive session, okay? Now, when our constituent comes to us with what they've heard, this, that, or the third, thank you. I will let the superintendent know, and we will address it at our next board meeting. Not, oh yeah, let me tell you what the superintendent said. She said she's going to do X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3. Or no, that's not really what happened. Here's what happened. Teacher A did B to C, and now we're out, okay? Because should the superintendent come back to us and make a recommendation for some sort of disciplinary action being taken against this individual, and the individual appeals that decision by the superintendent, well, guess who they appeal to? To the board. And if we already know every single detail about what happened because we weren't satisfied with, hey, guys, school A had a situation, we will bring it to you at the appropriate time. Well, now, when that appeal comes before us, we're out from hearing that, okay? Also, when the superintendent tells you guys that, hey, there's a potential situation, it's incumbent upon us as board members to not go out and do our own research into that situation, okay? And when someone comes to us with their research, we're advocating for our district, we're painting the district in the best light possible. Hey, I will let the superintendent know, or the superintendent is aware and we're handling it, okay? So, I mean, it's a delicate balance, Mr. Carpenter. The superintendent can't just keep everything secret to himself or herself, but the superintendent can't give you everything that he or she has in her file also. Likewise, it goes for the HR director or anyone else at the district, okay? At the appropriate time, I assure you, you will get it as board members, okay? So I hope that kind of answers your question and brings, everything kind of in line, but it is a delicate balance. Where are we, Dave?
Well, you have us at policy making, is that right?
Yes.
Close enough?
Sure.
Basically, policy making, which is one of your important functions, is covered in your board policy manual at BGD. And that basically says, that adoption of new policies or revising existing ones is the responsibility of the board. And then it talks about sort of the procedure. Normally, a change or addition to board policy is adopted after 2 readings. I don't know whether you've been in a position recently where you've been changing or adopting, usually 2 readings, but the majority, if it's an urgent matter, you can waive the second reading upon motion made. Policies, new policies or recommended changes often do come to you from the superintendent or the administration at some level through the superintendent to the board. It's pretty infrequent where the board says, we need a new policy. Now, the board can say that, and even when the board does feel that way or says we need to change this policy, they really should ask for a recommendation on how to go about, how the policy should be reworded from the administration. And like so many things, it comes to you as a recommendation which you either agree with or fully or partly agree with or really don't like the recommendation. You say, well, can you bring us back something else? The point that we wanted to make here is not clearly enough stated. So, it's like so many things that are your responsibility where you've got to vote and adopt something. It usually flows from a recommendation that you accept or not. Okay, what's next?
Well, I think this stuff should be rewritten, and that's probably part of our problem, most board problem. We see stuff like that, what you're putting up here, but it makes it almost impossible to do it that way. If you back up to your last point, this thing say policy review and evaluation is a function of the board, but it's the responsibility of the superintendent. That's hard.
Yeah, it is hard.
Because the board can do what they want with the superintendent, and regardless of what the superintendent say, if that board got 4 members that don't want to do that, it's not going to happen.
True.
Regardless of how logical it is.
That's true, but hopefully you're not going to be that much at loggerheads on things. And if you have that kind of strong difference of opinion, you need to try to work it out in some way. I mean, when things get really rough, and we occasionally see a real breakdown, you can have a retreat where you kind of get things out on the table and air your concerns, your disagreements, and just hopefully it doesn't get to that point. But part of it is being honest with each other and operating in good faith and being honest, and trying to work through issues rather than capitalize on them to take some sort of final action that is quite serious in nature. I mean, we've certainly been involved in situations where it's just become an unworkable relationship, but that's very rare, and often you can work through some of these issues that can arise. But the board, in many instances, the board majority does is the final word. Final word.
And that's the human side of it, whether it's right or wrong.
Yeah, but the superintendent has a contract, and that has to be honored as well. You don't want to be in a situation, and in fact, I was going to touch on this later. There are some in very infrequent situations where board members potentially can expose themselves to legal liability, even individually, if they really get out of their role and function and do or say some things that are,
legally actionable. So,
Some have, some gone to jail before.
yeah, some have.
Yes.
And some boards have, boards as a board and board members individually have been named in certain legal actions when they've really overstepped, whether it's breach of contract or violation of civil rights or something like that. And there may not be, your general liability policy may not cover claims against individual board members. Your liability policy may not cover that kind of a claim. So, hopefully you proceed cautiously and you get advice from legal counsel. And I guess you all understand the relationships with legal counsel. I mean, ultimately, legal counsel, if they're hired by the board, are responsible to the board. And when situations really get dicey, the superintendents are advised to seek separate counsel if there has to be some negotiation or whatever, because legal counsel, it's right in board policy. I mean, it's in section B. The board hires legal counsel. The interesting thing is that the board is the ultimate client, but all the day-to-day and all the things that arise on a daily or weekly basis, it's legal counsel working with the administration. So we get to know the administration really well, probably better than the board, because you don't see us that much. You don't come together that often, once or twice a month. So we, and all of those are all, sensitive, delicate relationships that have to be carefully, you have to understand those. You have to work constructively when you can and in good faith and try to resolve issues and not, as they said in The Godfather, which I watched the other night, we're not going to go to the mattresses here. We're going to try to work through things. And if you need to bring in a consultant to do some role playing or, to give you some advice on the interactions among administration and board, you can do that. That can be helpful. So anyway, probably said too much already here, but.
Well, I mean, I just want to add to that because Mr. Carpenter talked specifically about strong disagreements between policy making. Our first point under the policy says the policy must be legally based. So if you as a board desire to make a drastic change to your policy, first of all, as I said, it's got to be legally based. So I cannot think of a situation where a board and a superintendent couldn't be at polar opposites on the decision for the policy and both of them be legal. You understand what I'm saying? It's gonna be quite difficult for one to want to go in one direction and one to want to go in a totally different direction on a policy and it pass legal muster. So I understand your concern, but I mean for something to be that opposites, it's going to be tough. One or the other is probably not going to be legal, and your attorney will probably say, hey, you might don't want to go this route with writing the policy this way, or you may don't want to go that route with writing the policy another way. Because one thing you have to think about when you're writing policies, a policy on its face may pass muster, but you have to think about the ripples how that may affect someone, or how that may, subject the district to potential liability. So as a board, you don't want to make just a knee-jerk reaction and say, hey, well, this happened, so now we're going to change this policy to read blah, 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 so this one situation will never, ever, ever happen again. Because what you do is you potentially open the door for another situation to result from that. So you want to make sure your policies are legally and they want to be comprehensive. If your policy is comprehensive, you're going to take into effect, you know, okay, my objective is A, but the way that I will reach objective A also needs to be to prevent, you know, B, C, and D from occurring and subjecting our district to potential liability, okay? And as a board, you also want to have, you know, we've said this a few times, but you want to have confidence in the superintendent that you hired. She will come to you, she or he will come to you with recommendations on policy. I don't know, obviously you may disagree to a degree, but not to the point where, you know, we just can't agree on a policy, because this superintendent has done this job, you know, years. The superintendent comes to us with knowledge and training of the job. I mean, I would hope that you guys would understand the superintendent is not going to propose a policy that will hurt the district, thereby putting a stain on the superintendent's role or our position, you know, because we're going to evaluate the superintendent annually. And if a policy that the superintendent proposes adversely affects the superintendent's job, I don't think that a superintendent is going to do that. You know, I mean, we're kind of off base from our, you know, board role type situation, but, you know, a large part of that, as we said, is going to be board superintendent relations. So, I mean, we all want to try to work together on those. You have anything to add on? Anything else to add on policies?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
I think we've covered it.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk about a little bit about fiscal responsibility. As I said earlier, the board is responsible for approving and adopting the annual budget. Again, this is one of those kind of overlapping scenarios where the superintendent brings the budget to the board approves it, and the board adopts it. As I said earlier, superintendent is not going to bring you a bad budget, you know. We may disagree as board members with where some of these expenditures are going, but at the end of the day, the superintendent is the one who's dealing with the day-to-day operation of the school, of the district. So we kind of want to, you know, support that recommendation that the superintendents bring to us. And obviously, you know, we as a board, we have, you know, we're going to have some financial oversight. So we're going to say, hey, you know, you may want to consider, you know, do we really have to spend $2 million on whatever it is, you know? Being fiscal responsibility for board members does not just mean reducing the overall budget of the district, okay? It's not what we think about when we think of today's society, today's politics, where you think about, you know, I'm fiscally responsible. It's not just the ultimate number, okay? We as a board, as I said earlier, we have to make sure that the money is being spread across the district to benefit all of our students, okay? Not only does it benefit all of our students, but it advances the goals and the vision of the district. Let's say if your district has a lot of old buildings and we need to make some capital improvements, and the superintendent, now that's just you know, I don't know if y'all know, I saw your face, Ms. Ware. I don't know, you know, I've only been to one school, so this is not, I'm not talking about Lawrence 55. Okay, I'm just saying, you know, scenario. If the board gives the superintendent a vision, hey, you know, our 3-year, 5-year plan is we want to make these capital improvements, you know, towards the district. And the district comes back with us comes back to the board with a budget where the administration is trying to, expand the number of teachers or something that we have in the district. I mean, obviously, there's a little difference of opinion there, and that budget doesn't really go towards the district's vision, okay? But that's not just to say that, okay, well, no, boom, we're gonna flat out veto that. Maybe we as a board need to talk to the superintendent and say, hey, this is what we feel we want. We want to make these capital improvements, but can you explain to us, why it is that you feel like we need to have, increase teachers or administrators? Because you may find out that, okay, although this school is aging, we have space in this other school that's not being fulfilled or utilized. And if we added 3-4 teachers over here, we could take some pressure off of this building to where we can, get some minor capital improvements done and get this building to where we need. And everyone will end up at the same, at the same point. So that's why I know. I mean, I'm living in rainbows and fairies and unicorns. I understand, but I mean, literally, that's our goal. That's what we're trying to do here. Okay. Anytime you get multiple people in a room who all have the same say-so, you're not going to agree. But at the end of the day, let's try as board members and superintendents to do what's best for the district. That's all we're really trying to do. So I understand. I can see your face behind the mask, Mr. Carpenter, but that's what we're trying to do. Be fiscally responsible, make sure that we're providing our students with the best education environment that they can have. Let me see, I think...
I should know this, but remind me, where is the fiscal authority, the approval of your budget and a millage rate to fund your budget? Is that, are you under county council? Do you go to county council? You're fiscally autonomous. Of course, you're limited by Act 389 in terms of an increase in millage.
Right. And of course, 56 has to agree.
District 56?
You have to agree on the same millage increase?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah. And of course, this gets back to something I said earlier. You are required to maintain minimum effort from year to year. Required minimum effort means that you can't, legally, you can't really, you can't really fail to provide the same number of dollars you did the prior year. Now the question is, what legal authority or constraint is imposed on you if you wanted to increase the budget and increase the millage? What does Act 389 do? And that's assuming, see, this is where, again, some board members might say, we are not going up on taxes, period. We are staying at 150 mills for operations, and if some program has to be eliminated, eliminate it. I mean, that some boards say that to their administration. We're not going up in millage, even though Act 389 would let us go up 3 mills. We ain't doing it. And of course, you're balancing operating millage and debt service millage. Sometimes when you pay off some school bonds and 5 or 10 mills come off debt service, if you have the fiscal authority, sometimes you can shift some of that to operations, and it looks like no tax increase, which is true. I mean, the taxpayer may even be paying less taxes even though the operating millage rate has gone up, because you've had 10 mills come off debt service, okay, as you're paying off school bonds. Do you have outstanding school bonds right now?
think so.
I do, we do.
And of course, to do any real capital improvements, that's not likely to happen through your operating budget or your rainy day fund. That's going to have to come either from your 8% authority or a bond referendum. And that's a real complicated process to figure out what you're.
I was trying to steer away
You know,
from the bond
what's the board's will to build a new school or to renovate a school? Can we do it within our 8% authority? Do we have to issue bonds? Does that mean we have to have a referendum? Who's your bond counsel, by the way? Mick? Who is it, Theo? Okay, so that's Hainsworth. Hainsworth Sinclair Board. Yeah, we're not, the one thing we don't do is bond work. That's for Theo, or, well, it was the McNair firm. It's now, what is it? Foreman something or other.
Yeah.
Or Theo's firm, or what's her name? And her husband, they're lawyers from Newbury. The Popes. Anyway, while we do interface with bond counsel a little bit, like we have to issue a no litigation certification that might impact the ability to pay off school bonds, but it's all bond counsel work. And of course, you sometimes you have to contract for a facility study to really know what your needs are, and to put a price tag on those needs if you wanted to move forward. And then you get with bond counsel, and they say, well, you can't do this within your 8% authority. You're going to have to think about a referendum. And I'm just throwing things out. I don't know where you are with any of this kind of, building process. Any questions on FOIA before we wear ourselves and you out? I mean, on meetings, on executive session, on committee meetings, on the reasons for going into executive session.
I have a question about the policy making. I think, and one thing Anthony and I have talked about in years past is that, we really don't see policy changes or new policies until the board packet comes out. And then, that's our first glance at them. Some of these policies, I know, Mr. Freeman, you were talking about, if there's two really debatable sides on it, is one legal and one not legal. But I think what's happened with us more recently is there's been a lot of updates through the School Board Association, and those come straight through to us, and sometimes those come through and it's very minor wording, which is no big deal, but then there's others where it's a couple of words that have changed, but those words have a big impact, and at the end of the day, we don't have to change to that word. Like, we could have kept our policy as it was.
That can be true. That can be the case.
So, but what we as a board really never had the opportunity to do was kind of openly discuss those changes. I mean, we could discuss them in the board meetings, but, when you've got 20 policies that they're trying to do a first reading or a second reading, and then, trying to discuss them in one evening, there's just not enough time to do that. So, some of our policies, there's a couple that I still think need some word adjusting. Right. Is it appropriate to have a work session so we can openly discuss those policies and get input from the whole board and whomever, Dr. Thomas would like to have be a part of it?
It very much is, and boards that are engaged in fairly wholesale revision of their policy manual, they do have work sessions just on policy development and revision, because as you say, you can't, if you get recommendations on rewording 20 policies, it's too much to try to do at a regular meeting and to have a full discussion. Now, policy development, it must be done in open session. Policy development is not a legitimate executive session.
No, I meant
matter.
a work session just like this that the
Yeah.
public can come to.
Absolutely, yeah.
Live stream, yeah.
And I would definitely recommend, if you're thinking of revising several policies and you've gotten drafts or whatever, or recommendations, do you subscribe to the school board's policy updating service?
Yes.
And, you know, I mean, they do a decent job in that, but really their templates, their samples need to be reviewed. They need to be reviewed to see if they fit your district and the board's, you know, emphasis. It could be a matter of emphasis. And also they really, you know, I mean, they should be reviewed by legal counsel. Because we see, even though it's not technically legal, we often, because of what we've seen elsewhere, we might have a suggestion or two, even though it's not specifically legal. It is advice from counsel on what works best procedurally, what's best practice, what doesn't. I mean, we've seen some suggestions from the school boards that often don't make sense in a particular district. They might fit very well for most districts, but for your district, it might not be a perfect, you know, wording of something. So, but yeah, you certainly can have a work session on policy revision, just like you do for the budget or building programs, or, you know, anything like that. But it's likely to have to be an open session, because as you know, the legitimate executive session topics are fairly limited.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chairman, may I ask a question about policy right here?
Absolutely.
So if we did that, what would the process be for putting policies before legal counsel? Would we get those templates from the School Boards Association and do what we think needs to be done and then send it to council? How would that work?
Well, I mean, if there's a policy that you've had in place for years, but it doesn't seem to fit well, you could send it to, you know, you could say, look, we would like to change this to say such and such. Can we do that? You know, is it lawful, and does it make sense from your experience? You could send that to us and we could give you our feedback. Or you might want to look at the sample from the school boards as well, compare the two. It often is good to look at districts like yours at how they've handled a particular policy. They might have, you know, how many students do you have?
About 6,000.
6,000? Okay, so you're a medium-sized district. You're near big metropolitan areas, but you're also sort of rural. You know, you could find other districts, including the other one in the county, you know, and look at their policy ZBD and how are they handling it. There's no one way to go about it, but certainly any of those approaches are acceptable, and, you know, we'd be happy to look at any revision that you do or any thought that you have about how you want something changed.
It seems like every county's board's policies are lettered very, very, very similarly.
That comes out of school boards. That's that numbering, lettering system that is kind of, you know, it's a standard, but again, there's some districts that don't use the school board policies at all. they have their own, and I can think of two, but they're the two that I'm thinking of right off are really big districts.
Yeah, Greenwood does it a little bit different.
Greenwood's, I think, is different. I know for sure.
I do too.
Horry County has their own very different. Beaufort has a very different policy manual than anything that you see from the school boards. The numbering system, everything is different. Now, as I said before, they have to have a policy on bullying, but they don't have to have necessarily the one the school boards suggested. So, one thing about FOIA and electronic meetings and all of that, you do need to be a little bit careful with emailing these days. It's still an unsettled area of the law, but if you email him, that's not a meeting, and that's probably not something that is FOIA-able. But if you send the email to the whole group and ask them to respond to you, that one day is going to be considered probably to be a meeting under FOIA, because you've gotten together electronically on your district emails and you've asked for discussion, the board business, district business. And then, and somehow it gets out and the media may say, are there any reporters here?
They're online.
Oh, okay, well, I'm not going to say anything that they don't agree with. And in other states, it has already been found, either by the Attorney General or in court action, that kind of email discussion is actually a board meeting under FOIA. And you need to keep it in mind that it's one thing if you two guys are on the district email, but when you start getting group discussion, you might be engaged in a meeting and not even know it. So, any questions about anything that's come up? We can try to answer most any question you have about policy or state statutes or whatever.
Also, if you guys go out to dinner together and, as a board, just hanging out, whatever, relaxing, and the conversation drifts from how are your grandkids or how are your kids to, oh, my child is at this school and this is what's going on at this school, and I wish that they would change XYZ or 1, 2, 3 at this school, that can also raise you some FOIA issues with potentially having a meeting or making a decision. Like, I think at the next board meeting, we probably should vote to change XYZ 1, 2, 3 to make this school better for our kids. That could be totally harmless and could be, beneficial, whatever you're deciding to do, but could be a violation as well. Just briefly, because we skipped some slides on advocacy, hope you guys know to always communicate the district's needs and position with your local elected state officials, your representatives. I got my slide said those guys are going to make a decision about public education whether you talk to them or not. There's going to be something from the State House telling Lawrence 55 how they need to operate, how they need to educate their kids, and the whole myriad of things. Make sure that you're communicating with your local legislature. I know the State Department has a 2-day at the Capitol. Hope you all take part in that. I don't know, are they doing that virtually now, or is it in person?
Yeah,
it's
coming up pretty soon, I think.
They have one. I know they usually have 2. There's one in like early spring, and then there's one kind of. It could be virtual. I don't know, but that's something that you want to participate in, and you want to call your legislator to let them know, hey, this is what we're dealing with in Lawrence 55, or, hey, by the way, that unfunded mandate that you guys passed, it really hurts us, or, hey, thank you for, getting this road paved to where I don't have to send a tow truck out to pull my school bus out every time it rains. Don't just come to those guys with the bad, let them know when they're doing a good job as well. I think I had one more, but we'll probably just open it up for questions. I think do you feel there's a topic that we did not address? Well, that's good. Dave?
I think we're finished.
Well, go ahead.
We all have we always have topics that we don't address. I mean that's all the time.
I understand. It happens.
We talk about back to ethics. What if a school board member does something that's out of line? I mean, where's the teeth to pull them back in line? I mean, from what I've seen, there isn't any.
Well, you got your censure.
Got what?
Censure, which is basically a public statement saying, hey, Mrs. Carpenter, what you did was inappropriate. Your board chair is responsible for, keeping the meeting in order. And we should always respect our board chair. I mean, I've been to a few of you guys' meetings, and y'all tend to do a really good job. And I'm not just saying that. You guys have done a good job respecting, the chair's authority, staying on the agenda, and moving forward. That has not been my experience across the state. There are some situations where you'll have a chair that's banging on the gavel, and you'll have a person who's just continuing to go off the rails. What I will tell you, Mr. Carpenter, that if the board itself has a overall demeanor of respect, and there's one outlier, the public is aware, and usually they will speak at the ballot box more so than us trying to, curtail or keep one or two members in line. A lot of times unfortunately, a lot of times the corrector is often made to, seem that he's in a worse position than the person who's actually engaging in the action. But that's something that, as a board, I think you guys are more than capable of dealing with. There have been I've dealt with some situations in other districts where boards have been interested in actually removing a board member. I will tell you that is quite difficult to do because you are elected and you do not want to, disenfranchise anyone's vote. So outside of, some really bad ethical violations and things of that nature, you guys are pretty much, safe and in your position as board members. I don't know, are you guys, I'd have to look at your policy to see, but a lot of times board members get into kind of sticky situations when they move, especially if they move outside the district. I think most policies require you to notify and then, within a certain number of days, step down from your position, stuff of that nature. I'm guessing you guys probably have something similar to that, but as far as, disciplining your fellow board members, it's tough.
Well, like you said, the only thing you can do is file ethical violations on that person, which can be investigated, but you can also, hopefully bring that person aside and talk with them or have a candid conversation. But you're elected by your constituents, and they're the only ones who can. And these board members didn't elect me; only my constituents did.
That's true.
So
And like I said, as a board, if you guys have a culture of us all working together,
absolutely, you should.
We're human beings. We're going to be naturally drawn to somebody. If the board has good culture, whoever that person kind of looks up to, and like Ms. Ware said, kind of bring them something like, hey man, this is kind of not how we do it here. I understand if you have an issue, let's work together, let's remain professional, and let's not embarrass ourselves in front of
people still have their own way. I guess because I was taken under somebody else's wing. And that person helped me along the way. I mean, and they were really, really good. They were former board members here as far as like, some of them have passed on, the Bill Gregory's and Charles Culberson, of course, Mr. Maxie Hunter still living, him and his wife. But a lot of them took me under their wing because I was here by myself as far as being the first. So it was fine. But I learned a lot from them. I sat back and I listened and I learned, and I was in the seat until, you gotta, give everybody a chance, because sometimes words can hurt or words can heal, bring you closer together. And you gotta give respect to get it, as well as work together collectively. It's not about me, it's about the students that we serve. And that's what I'm here for. I mean, otherwise, there's no need. I mean, they are what I'm here for.
I have a question regarding, you mentioned about having a retreat. So as far as all of the requirements that would need to be in place for a retreat, would it be the same as a regular meeting or work sessions, or
Yes.
are there different requirements?
No, a retreat is a meeting.
So
And you have to hold a retreat within your own district.
And we've had a retreat. I mean, we had one at the Jordan. It was like on a Saturday, or I can't remember when it was. It was like on a odd day, but we were there all day, but we had someone to facilitate it. And it was really, of course, the media and everybody was invited. I don't think they came, but like now you can do it virtually, so, you just have to have somebody to facilitate it and make sure everybody's notified. But they're really good, and it just, go around the room, express yourself. It's pretty neat. Kind of unleashed, unfiltered, I guess, so to speak, whatever, but seriously. And that's what everybody needs, a mentor to help them, and not because I'm old by age on the board or experience, and I am. I mean, I'm fine with it. But I'm just saying, it's best to sometimes listen and learn, just because you pick up on something you didn't know before. You really do.
And you'd be surprised, I mean, and this is probably for some of you newer board members, but you'd be surprised how many new board members actually form great bonds and great friendships with board members on other districts' boards. Because a lot of times, you don't want to, I hate to say this, but you don't want to look to your board like, I don't know something. That's just, all of us. You're sitting in the seat. You're there because you know something. Somebody believes you know something. So you don't want to have it out there that, oh, man, this guy, William really don't know as much as he say he do. So I'm not going to ask, Dave this question, but I'll go and I'll call someone else and say, hey, this is what we have going on. How do you think I should handle this?
Fairfield or Lee or Lexington or Richmond. You do get to know but this board has been hindered from that because we haven't had I guess they've been virtually done as far as the meetings and everything, the conferences and all. So it's kind of, because I've seen Dave Duff and you at World Board meetings and the barbecues or whatever, the regional. I mean, seriously, we have gotten together in those kinds of settings so often that it's just common nature. And
I tell you, those conferences are tough on Dave and I. Man, I feel like we just answer questions from breakfast until the bar closes.
Free legal advice. What you talking about? That's what we look for.
Exactly.
Get it when you can.
But again, I don't mind because a lot of the questions that we get are dealing with some of the same issues that we address today, and so it's good to ask, especially when it's not going to cost you. So, with that being said, I'm gonna wrap this thing up. My clock is saying it's exactly 5 p.m. So I want to thank you guys for your attentiveness, for your participation.
Sorry about my lateness, but thank you.
That's
it's kind of hard on Mondays.
I understand. But yeah, thank you guys again. I wish we would have put a slide up with our contact information on it, but pretty sure you guys can find it if you need it.
Well, Mr. Freeman, I was actually going to ask if you could email Dr. Thomas or myself, and then we can get it to the rest of the group. If you could email your slides, would that be
course.
possible?
That's fine.
And that way
Actually-
we can we can get a copy of them to the other two members that weren't able
Okay.
to join us today as well.
Y'all have it.
Oh, you have it already?
Yeah, you
Okay,
guys have it,
perfect.
yeah.
Thank you,
So-
thank you. Okay.
We'll be sure, we'll give him the authorization to disseminate that information.
Thank you so much.
Once again, thank y'all for allowing us
you.
to present this to you guys. You know, we really appreciate it. I'm gonna steal Dave's line. Dave always says an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So, I guess I told y'all this at our last meeting, but feel free to give us a call. You know, especially when you have these pressing issues where you know it's gonna be one that shakes the rafters. Because it's a lot better to go in with a better understanding of what the potential pitfalls and outcomes may be on the other side than to just be surprised at the end of the day. So again, thank y'all. I do appreciate it.
Thank you, we appreciate it. With that kind of wraps us up unless you guys have anything else. If anyone would like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Huh?
Approved. Everyone have a good night.